Bigfoot is an all-time favourite when talking of cryptic creatures. The large, hairy-like ape that's said to roam the forests in mainly North America has been the talk for over 2 centuries. The trouble is, there are far too many hoaxes out there, so it's hard to make any kind of conclusion. Some believe they exist and spend all of their lives believing so, even going on hunts to look for them. And some believe they're just folklore, saying the lack of evidence and amount of Bigfoots needed to keep the population going does not add up. One thing is for sure though, the sightings and encounters with these supposed creatures are in the thousands, and here are 5 of some of the best and most thought-provoking ones I can find. So as always, sit back and enjoy. The Ape Canyon. Just to the northeast of Washington's Mount St. Helens lies Ape Canyon, home to one of the most famous Bigfoot attacks in history. Miner Fred Beck and 4 others had been prospecting in the Mount St. Helens area. During their time there, the men had periodically stumbled across large, unexplained footprints that were at least 19 inches long and not of any known animal. Then, on a hot July month in 1924, the men were working at a gold mine in a deep canyon during the day and would return to their cabin at night to eat and sleep. For over a week, the men had heard strange whistling noises at night, as well as booming thumping sounds coming from within the forest. One evening, Fred and one of the other men went to the spring to fetch water, carrying their rifles just in case. As the pair made their way over, they were startled to see a 7-foot-tall, hairy creature on the other side of the canyon, hiding behind a tree. Fred's friend panicked and took a shot at it, and it ran off fast, upright like a human. They watched it disappear into the woods, and the men returned to their cabin to tell the others. Around midnight that night, they all heard a tremendous thud against the side of the cabin, along with twigs breaking from outside. They looked to see what was out there, and could see at least 3 of the upright, hairy creatures that the 2 men had spotted earlier. The beasts then started hurling rocks at the cabin, and the men took shots. They would later describe how it seemed like the creatures were trying to push the cabin over, but when they were unsuccessful, one of them reached through a gap in the cabin and tried to grab an axe. The frenzied attack continued through the night, ending just before sunrise. The men then cautiously left the cabin to head home, leaving all of their belongings behind. As they had barely left the cabin, Fred could see one of the creatures near the edge of the canyon and shot at it 3 times before it fell off the cliff. The men then made a pact not to tell anyone about their encounter, in fear of being humiliated and not believed. However, one man could not keep quiet, and it soon got into the papers, prompting people from all over to go hunting for the so-called Great Hairy Apes or Mountain Devils. The area became known as Ape Canyon, and Fred returned to the cabin with reporters to track the beasts, although nothing was found apart from a few footprints, and what happened to the one Frank apparently shot is not known. Since the incident, more and more sightings have been reported in Ape Canyon, and at one stage a reward was offered if a Bigfoot could be caught. Whatever happened to those miners in that canyon is always going to remain a mystery, and Frank Beck added to this further by stating he thinks Bigfoot could be a supernatural being, hence why one has never been caught. What's your thoughts? Mike Willy. This encounter involves deer hunter Mike Willy from Keachar, Louisiana, who had set out on the afternoon of December 1981 in perfect hunting weather. He parked his truck and walked to his deer stand. After sitting there for around 30 minutes, he spotted a young deer running towards him. As she approached the deer stand, it was clear that she was exhausted and had been running from something. Mike instinctively thought that it must be a male deer and prepared himself for its appearance. But as he looked around, he noticed something in the trees. He described it as 7 to 8 foot tall, stood upright and very hairy. At first, he was convinced it was a man dressed in a gorilla suit, so he started shouting at it, telling them to clear off and stop messing around. Mike lined up his rifle so he could look through the scope to get a closer look, and was shocked by what he saw. It let out a roar, and Mike got a look at its huge human-like teeth. Mike said a faint whistle could then be heard in the distance, and the creature he was looking dead in the eye whistled back. Realizing this was most likely a call for its mate, he decided to run back to his truck, but the creature started chasing him. As he approached his truck, he realized he was not far enough in front to be able to get into his vehicle without it catching him, so fired a warning shot. This was enough to keep the creature back long enough for him to get into his truck and drive away. But one last look in his rearview mirror, and he could now see 2 of these creatures chasing the truck before they turned off into the woods. Before this encounter, Mike had heard of Sasquatches, but never believed they were real. He is now convinced the 2 beasts he saw that day were in fact Bigfoots. When asked why he didn't shoot it when he had the chance, he replied it was too human. It had human eyelashes and teeth and a human-like face, but was fully covered in brown hair. So, did Mike encounter a real-life Bigfoot whilst out hunting in Louisiana in 1981? What do you think? The Siege of Hanavi. This next incident took place in January 2000, when a family living in a rural homestead just outside of the town of Hanavi in Oklahoma made a call to the Bigfoot Field Research Organization, claiming they were being terrorized by an unknown creature that was huge, had a foul smell, and was repeatedly trying to get into their house at all hours of the day. Bigfoot Research Organization representatives visited the home, and the family shared what they had been experiencing. Loud screams, whistling and chattering from up in the hills, and on one occasion the creature had been shot at when it was sighted up on the mountain but ran away. They also revealed the beast was stealing meat from their freezer that was located in an outside shed, and often found mutilated deer that had their legs violently twisted and broken, and had their internal organs pulled through a hole made between their neck and ribcage. It was discovered that the family planted Austrian snow peas all around the property to attract deer to hunt, which they believe is the reason the Sasquatches were in that area, as deer carcasses are easy prey for them. However, due to the random shootings the locals would often do if they thought a Bigfoot was present in the woods, investigators deemed it unsafe to remain on the property and carry out research, although they had seen enough to be convinced that there was some unknown creature that lived nearby. News soon got out about what was going on at the homestead, and authorities got involved for another reason when they found out the family were hunting deer from their porch. Steps were taken to deter the deer from being attracted to the home, and bar from a few howls up in the hills, it seems the supposed Bigfoots have moved on. The Leflore County Massacre. This next story is old, meaning that either adds to its believability, or that it has been highly exaggerated over the years. I'll let you see what you think and make up your own mind. In the 1850s, Native Americans known as the Choctaw tribe were living in Oklahoma territories, during which they reported getting nocturnal visits from what they described as giants, who started off stealing crops but then began abducting and killing the tribe's children, possibly to eat. The natives asked the local community for help, and former US Cavalry Captain Joshua Leflore stepped up and organised a party to track down whatever was lurking in the woods and causing this trouble. He rounded up 30 tribe members and 7 cavalrymen, and they set off on horseback armed with rifles, heading deep into the forest where the giants were known to live. Almost as soon as they reached the edge of the forest, the floor was littered with bones, presumably of those who had been taken from the tribe. 4 hairy beasts were then spotted, and Leflore opened fire, but one of the creatures lunged at his horse, fatally wounding it. Leflore found himself face to face with the Bigfoot, and a point-blank range from his rifle proved insufficient at killing it. The story goes that Leflore's head was ripped off during the fight. A battle then ensued in which several cavalrymen lost their lives, as well as 4 Sasquatches. After the battle, the surviving group surveyed the area and discovered the bodies of 19 children. The men buried the children in small graves and then buried their beloved captain, honouring him with a 21-gun salute as a mark of respect. They then burnt the putrid bodies of the Bigfoot and left. It's an intense story, but is it too good to be true? While there was definitely a Captain Leflore, and the Choctaw tribe did reside in that area at the time, an area that many say is the perfect terrain for Bigfoots to habitat. However, there are questions about what the creatures were, because it's possible they were grizzly bears, although it's unlikely, but not impossible, that they would eat children. Another theory is the cavalrymen went in search of bandits who they got into a confrontation with, and the story was changed to Bigfoots over the years as rumours spread. Whatever the truth is, it's stories like this one that add to the growing number of believers in Bigfoot-type creatures who reside deep in the forests throughout the United States. Theodore Roosevelt. 26th President of the United States, Theodore Roosevelt was handed the presidency after William McKinley was assassinated. He was an unlikely successor, but his personality and macho image proved popular with the American public, and he was voted to full office in 1904. He went on to be admired by historians and heralded as a great leader, ranking alongside Washington, Jefferson, and Lincoln. This was part due to him being quirky, adventurous, and spontaneous, and his passion for hunting. So is it possible that his account of a Bigfoot is the most credible of all? Roosevelt told of this story in a book he wrote in 1892 called The Wilderness Hunter. The book is essentially about big game hunters in the wilderness, describing some of their experiences along with his own, But one story in particular stands out to Bigfoot enthusiasts. It's a story he recounted about a hunter called Bowman, who set off on a trapping expedition with his partner, and after they had set up camp, they went to explore the surroundings. Upon returning, the camp had been destroyed. Their immediate thoughts were that it was a bear, although after inspecting the tracks left, they realised whatever the creature was, it had been stood on 2 feet, not 4. That night, as they settled down to sleep, they were startled by strange noises and could see the silhouette of a large creature lurking in the bushes. The 2 men fired their guns, and the creature ran off. The next morning, the men went to check their traps, and again when they returned, their campsite had been demolished. They decided to stay one more night, and then make their way back home in the morning. During the night, the creature returned, tormenting them again like it had done the previous nights. In the morning, Bowman went off alone to collect the traps one last time, and when he returned to camp, his friend was dead. It looked as if he had been flung around the campsite by something very powerful. His neck was broken, and he had been badly bitten. Although surprisingly, his body was intact, and no attempt had been made to eat him. Bowman dropped everything and fled the scene. Over the years, there has been speculation about the story regarding whether or not Bowman was a real person, or just fiction, as Roosevelt never talked much about it. Some have even wondered if this was in fact Roosevelt's own experience, and he used the name Bowman as a disguise, although that is not something he ever admitted to. Regardless of its origin, Theodore's book and the contents in which it was written makes you believe these are actual accounts of being a hunter in the wilderness. So it's definitely a credible story, and although Roosevelt never publicly admitted to believing in Bigfoot, this encounter and its inclusion in his book makes it seem that he thought there was some credibility to it. What's your thoughts? So there's 5 supposed encounters with the infamous Bigfoot. Let me know your thoughts on the stories, and whether or not you believe Bigfoots exist. Or if you've ever had your own encounter, then feel free to share it. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.